Hello, welcome to Have a Go, and I'm Alan. Doing something a bit different today, in that we're talking about books. More specifically, the ones I've picked up on my crazy journey along this stuff. I thought I'd start with The Elephant on the Shelf, Machinery's Handbook. This is a big book, and I bought it second hand because the prices for new ones you would not believe. This is not what you call a normal reference book, and that it's just about entirely numbers and figures on all the different standards that machining uses. Lucky for me, I haven't actually had to crack it yet, but for the day that I do, it comes with a guidebook on how to use it. That's how bad this book is. It comes with another book to tell you how to use the first book. But if you want the stuff you make to work with all the vast array of other machinery in this modern world, you need to know what the standards are. This is another really good book. This is about sandcasting. The Complete Handbook of Sandcasting by C.W. Ammon. Dave Gingery actually recommends this specific book. It's by a man who spent a very long time working in the sandcasting industry, and he goes over the sand, the patterns, the moulding boxes, how to do your runners and your gates, core boxes, everything you could want to know. Because I'm incurably nosy, I also got this one, Backyard Foundry for Home Machinists by B. Terry Aspen. This one's a bit more home jobby, but it still has a lot of very nice information, like split patterns, pattern plates. You can tell that it's a reprint of an older book just by how it draws the diagrams. They seem very 1940s to me, but it's a modern print. These two books are from are of more modern writing. This one is actually specifically about mini lathes, or the small Chinesium ones as they call them. 7x14 is what the internet usually calls them. And this is all specifically how to work with a mini lathe. It specifies in the introduction, it's not there for the big lathes. It's not there to tell you about how you could do it better with a big lathe, or with techniques that are meant for that but scaled down. This is how to work with your mini lathe. This one is about making small boilers for steam engines. I'm not 100% on why I got it actually, but it does seem to be rather complete. And if I ever do build a steam engine, I'll be ready to make a boiler rather than just run it on compressed air. Now, onto the nitty gritty. Some advice I heard a while ago for this is to go for the very oldest manuals that you can get and go through those, because they won't mention CNC machines or computer anything. How to run a lathe. This is a version of the South Bend book, I believe. It is very complete. Although this one is old enough, it actually shows you how to set up a line shaft shop where there's maybe one electric motor in the corner that costs the owner a lot of money. Because there's only one expensive motor, the one motor runs everything. Or a steam engine. That's the era this book was written, and goes over all the basics on how to run a lathe. You know it's an old book when it has advice in the back, like, if a boy learns the trade properly, he becomes a first-class mechanic. But if he has ability, he need not stop at that. This is another version of the same book, I believe, except it is a different edition. Other stuff, but it's in bigger print, so it's nice and easier to read. This is a third version, but it is different. This one is a much later print of it, and it actually talks about electric motors as well as line shafts, and that's actually the main focus of the lathe part of this book. The reason I got this version, however, is due to this part: how to run a metalworking shaper. The shaper being this funny looking thing, and one of the machines that Dave Gingery tells you how to build in his books. These are more books on how to do basic lathe work. They're aimed a bit more at the beginner than the South Bend books, which assume that you're starting out as a professional in some capacity. This one is an older book, but it actually focuses on the man or the amateur working in his shed with the lathe. It starts with the assumption that you're working in your home shed and that you're not a professional grade machinist. It covers things like working on the faceplate for complicated setups, which you could possibly do with a chuck of some sort, except it'd be more complicated than you might want to deal with. Line boring setup there, which is actually reminiscent of how I'm boring out my headstock right now. Instead of the chuck, I've got it being driven directly off the pulley, and instead of the support, I've got nothing. But that's the same basic idea as what I'm doing with my headstock. The reason that he covered faceplate setups is because back in those days, yes, they could get lathes like we can today, but they didn't have the small bench mills like we do these days, so they had to be able to do it on the lathe. To continue the theme of old school, this is a reprint. This is not the original cover, and this is a good example of why you need to edit things before you publish them. Oh dear. That's the actual name of the book, Lathe Design, Construction and Operation. And this is the subtitle. Look what they did to it. Now this one, the author seems to be intent on to start with the very beginnings of the lathe, talk about how it's designed, talk about how it began as a machine to cut screws that could only cut screws. Move on to the very beginnings. Shows you the gap lathe. He seems to be very intent on going through every single step of how lathes evolved, including how the cross ties between the bed go, how the bearings were designed, and I mean how they were designed. Every little bit of how they were designed, including the gear change mechanisms. And then he goes on to tell you, finally, how the tooling in that works, including the tool holders, all the different tool holders that were designed. Then he goes on to how to test the lathe and see how accurate it is. This will come in useful when I get my lathe to where I can test it. And it continues and continues. He talks about engine lathes, which seems to be a code word for great big thing that you couldn't shift with 4 men. Engine lathes again. Special lathes. Special lathe being a lathe that you use for a specific type of work rather than a generalist, I think. Turret lathes. Ask someone who knows what a turret lathe is. Then at the very back, practical instructions on lathe operation. Beginning with, of course, how to set up your line shafts. You get the impression it's the kind of guy who'll nail someone in a party and talk at them for several hours about lathes and their construction and their history, completely ignoring the fact that the poor guy has tried to escape several times. Despite that, if you're after the information in it, it is a very good book. This one I am not sure why I picked up. I think it was on the basis that I was looking for anything about scraping. This is about lapping, which is kind of in the same ballpark as scraping, but it's more about making an extremely accurate surface. This one is a very interesting book. It does have a section on scraping because the author seems to have set out with the intention of making a complete little encyclopedia of state-of-the-art metalworking as of about 1919, I think. Talks about blacksmithing, surfacing metal, like how to make files among other things, how to use files, annealing, hardening and tempering, drilling, taps, screws, soldering, forging, sheet metal, lathes. Don't notice that part. Gold and silver working. Unless I win lotto, this part's not happening. Making a clock. Steam engines. Boilers. Petrol motors. Building a dynamo. An electric bell. Microscope and a telescope. Like I said, this guy seems to have set out with the intention of making the most complete book about metalworking, and he means any kind of metalworking. And he seems to have done a pretty good job. Just got to remember, this is 1919 metalworking, not 2019. This is also interesting. Old-fashioned tool making. And it shows you how the old boys used to get incredibly accurately placed holes in parts, to within 0.01 of a millimetre. Despite having machines where you'd think it was made by a blacksmith, by today's standards anyway. It walks you through how they make the tools to do these accurate things, and then on how to use these tools to get that accuracy. And it's beyond my skills, but you got to have something to aim for, don't you? And on to more generalist stuff. This is how to do things in machine shops. Machine Shop Practice by Kay Moultrie. And this seems to have been written with the intention of being used as a guidebook in a polytech setting. Where you'd have a room full of boys and a room full of machines, and you'd be a teacher up the front training them on how to use them. Basic measuring, drilling machines, lathes, turret production and vertical lathes. This goes through how to do all those things in the workshop setting. Bearing in mind, again, it's not modern and it doesn't talk about CNC. But if you're looking for a good practical guide on how to do things, it's a pretty good reference. This is a couple of little project books, Making Small Workshop Tools. These days you could probably buy things like the clamp and the cover here for about $5 from China and Amazon. But you don't go into this as a hobby to save money, do you? You go into it for the fun of it. This one It says a complete course. I'm pretty sure it's a series of projects to help you become a better machinist. So thinking of it as a project book might be an idea, I think. Once I get the milling machine done, I'll be able to use this. These are more books from the same series. This one was interesting. It's an interesting little look into how clockmakers work. And it made me determined I don't want to make a clock. This one I do not recommend. If you have a Myford 7B whatever it is, then this book is good for you. If you do not have that specific model, it is not good for you. This says spindles for small shop metal workers. What it should say is spindles for small shop metal workers who own a Myford 7B and would like to make new spindles for it. If you do, it'll walk you through the whole process bit by bit, every single operation of what to do to make these spindles. Otherwise, this one though I do recommend. Gears and Gear Cutting by Ivan Law. This one is very interesting. Talks about the theory of how gears work and why the teeth are shaped the way that they are. And it walks you through the various types and also how to cut them. How to cut bevel gears. Shows you how to make a cutter to cut those gears as well. If you want to learn more about making your own gears, highly recommend it. Having said that, bear in mind I don't know anything. This one, I tried to order the original edition of this, got lost in the mail. I complained to the seller, they said they sent it again, that got lost in the mail, so I bought a different edition from a different seller. This one, The Metal Workers Workshop, the author is being literal when he says that. He's talking about what kind of building for your workshop, how to plan it out, what kind of tools you'd like to buy for your workshop, precision tools, all the rest of it, what to put in your workshop. It doesn't actually say how to use your workshop, just how to set it up. So if you're starting from a position of very little at hand, it'll probably be a good idea. This one is by Tubal Cain. Not Mr. Pete 222 from YouTube, it's a different Tubal Cain. The name itself is a pseudonym from the Bible, where Tubal Cain was actually the first metal worker mentioned in the Bible. Series of small projects. What's interesting about this one is that Tubal Cain, like Mr. Pete's Tubal Cain, is very, very old-fashioned. He comes at things from an extremely old school way of doing things. One of the projects he mentioned is a Turner's cement, which is a thing stuff you boil up in a pot. You put it on your lathe, let it set a little, and then you press the work into the cement, and you can turn very, very thin parts on it because they're stuck in the cement, too thin to actually hold in a chuck. That's the kind of old school this guy is. I'm including this one as a curiosity, mechanical movements. It's interesting because you can look at the diagrams of the movements and try and follow for yourself just how they work. If you like puzzles, this is a good one. Now, this is a couple of project books. You can probably work out what kind of projects. Building Simple Model Steam Engines by Tubal Cain. This is the same one author that I showed you a minute ago, and again he comes at things from a very old-fashioned point of view. A lot of the figures and measurements are in imperial, unfortunately, so you'd probably have to redraw everything, make sure that they're all fitted together, and do a lot of paperwork to actually make any of these. At least if you don't work in Imperial. This book is well beyond my abilities. It shows you how to make that little steam locomotive. That's not a toy, that's an actual moving machine with a boiler and pistons and everything. It's a beautifully made book. All the plans are hand drawn, they're not computer generated. They're amazingly detailed with fold out pages. Like I said, this is well beyond my abilities, but I think it's a beautiful book to have and own. Another project book. I should add, these project books, I'm not going to be able to do anything with them until the lathe is working. I mostly got them to make sure that I'm not in a position where I have the lathe, but I don't know what to actually do with it. And this is the book that started it all. This book is the reason I bought all the other ones. Build your own metalworking shop from scrap, beginning with the charcoal foundry. Build a propane one instead, or buy one like I did. The metal lathe, the metal shaper, the milling machine, drill press, dividing head, and the sheet metal brake. As anyone who's been watching my channel will know, as soon as I find the page, I'm working on building the metal lathe. That's what the final lathe will look like, probably. Talks about how to do the foundry work of melting the metal and casting it, how to make the patterns, any special things you'll need for any particular casting, scraping that you'll have to do, roughly how to do it. You know, it's a good book when it's getting a bit dilapidated. It doesn't close properly anymore either, from all the sawdust and everything else that's picked up. That's the book I'll be moving on to after I finish the lathe, the metal shaper. And after the shaper, it shows a horizontal milling machine. This isn't a vertical one, where the quill goes down. This is a horizontal one where the quill is on its side and the work is either mounted there or on an angle plate like he has bolted there. Then it progresses from there. The idea being with this book, you start from a position of no knowledge and no actual machines, and he shows you how to make those machines and also how to use them at the same time. You've got to remember, this book was written in the 1980s when you couldn't get cheap little Chinese lathes and mills. He actually specifies in this book to get books like the South Bend Lathe Manual I showed you earlier. The one that I've got 3 different editions of. He actually tells you to get books like that and other ones to show you how to use the lathe and the milling machine he shows you how to make. He doesn't claim to teach you how to use a lathe or a mill. Instead, he shows you how to build the lathe, how to do very, very simple things with it, and it tells you to go, once you're up to cutting things, it tells you to look at the South Bend Lathe Manual for how to cut the cutters and all the rest of it. It's a very good book in my opinion. But that's my little metalworking bookshelf. I've got a lot of other bookshelves, but they're not really pertinent to the channel. I might put them on, I might not. I'm leaning towards not. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.